March 15, 1987. Elena Vasquez had been Pablo Escobar's chief chemist for 3 years, the woman he trusted to cook the purest cocaine in South America. That's exactly why she decided to destroy him from the inside. Deep in the Magdalena jungle, Elena added one extra compound to every batch, a chemical signature that would degrade the product within weeks. Pablo was losing millions, and he didn't know why. The sabotage lasted 4 months. Elena thought she was saving lives, keeping poison off American streets. Miguel thought they were heroes. But when Pablo's sicarios finally traced the problem to their lab, only Elena made it to the extraction point. Miguel screamed her name as the machetes fell. For 25 years, Elena believed he died that night. She built a new life on that foundation, became Dr. Vasquez, saved addicts instead of creating them. Then Sofia vanished, and the package arrived. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena's hands trembled as she stared at the leather-bound notebook on her kitchen table. 25 years hadn't faded the coffee stains on its cover or the burn mark from Miguel's cigarette on the bottom corner. She'd thought it was buried in the jungle along with everything else from that life. The package had arrived an hour after Sofia failed to come home from school. No return address, no note. Just the notebook wrapped in brown paper, sitting on her doorstep like a coiled snake. Inside the front cover, written in Miguel's familiar handwriting, "Elena, you left me to die. Now I have something of yours." Her phone buzzed. Unknown number, Dr. Vasquez. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "You always were good under pressure." The voice hit her like a physical blow. Older, rougher around the edges, but unmistakably Miguel Herrera. Though not so good at loyalty. Elena's knees buckled. She gripped the counter, forcing air into her lungs. "You're dead." Close. But Pablo's boys weren't quite as thorough as they thought. Miguel's laugh carried no warmth. "Funny thing about machetes. They don't always hit vital organs. Takes a long time to bleed out in the jungle. Plenty of time to think about the person who promised to wait for you but ran when things got difficult. Where is Sofia?" Elena's voice cracked on her granddaughter's name. "Safe. For now. She's actually quite lovely. Reminds me of you at that age, before you became a coward." Elena closed her eyes, seeing Sofia's face. 17 years old, bright and innocent, with her whole life ahead of her. Everything Elena had never had a chance to be. She has nothing to do with this. She has everything to do with this. She's your weakness, Elena. The thing that will make you come home. Home? Elena's laugh was bitter. That place stopped being home the day Pablo's empire fell. Our lab is still there, hidden deeper in the jungle now, but operational. I've been waiting, Elena. Building, getting stronger, and now I need my partner back. I'm not that person anymore. Dr. Elena Vasquez, addiction counselor at Miami General. Helped over 3,000 people get clean. Board member of the Children's Recovery Foundation. Grandmother to Sofia Martinez, honor student at Coral Gables High School. Miguel's voice turned silky with menace. Should I continue? Elena felt the walls of her carefully constructed life crumbling around her. What do you want? The same thing we always wanted, to cook the purest product in South America. Except this time, we're going to do it right. No sabotage, no heroics, just chemistry. I won't do it. You will. Because if you don't, Sofia dies. And not quickly like you thought I did. I've learned patience, Elena. I've learned to make things last. The line went dead. Elena stared at the phone until her vision blurred. Then she opened the notebook, her fingers finding the familiar pages where she'd documented their sabotage, every formula they'd corrupted, every batch they'd deliberately ruined, the chemical signatures that had cost Escobar millions before he'd finally discovered the source. She'd convinced herself they were saving lives, that every gram of degraded cocaine was one less hit on the streets. Miguel had believed her, trusted her vision of using their position to fight from within, right up until the day Pablo's men surrounded their lab. Elena had reached the extraction point first. The helicopter was already spinning up, the pilot shouting over the rotor wash that they had 30 seconds before the whole jungle would be crawling with sicarios. She'd waited, counted heartbeats, listened for Miguel's footsteps through the undergrowth. But when the gunfire erupted from the lab, when she heard Miguel's scream cut through the jungle air, she'd made her choice. She'd climbed into that helicopter and left him behind. Now Sophia was paying for her cowardice. Elena walked to her bedroom closet and pulled aside the false panel she'd installed years ago. Inside sat a small go bag she'd hoped never to touch again. Fake passport, untraceable credit cards, and a .38 revolver that still held the bullets she'd loaded in 1987. Her phone rang again. This time it was a video call. Sophia appeared on the screen, tied to a chair in what looked like a concrete room. Tape over her mouth, terror in her eyes, but alive, unhurt. "You have 48 hours," Miguel's voice came from behind the camera. "Bogota Airport, Terminal 2. There'll be a man with a white flower in his lapel. He'll have your ticket to Medellin. And if I bring the police?" Then Sophia learns what a machete feels like, just like I did. The screen went black. Elena sat on her bed, holding the gun. Outside, Miami hummed with its usual chaos, traffic, sirens, life continuing as if her world hadn't just exploded. She thought about the addicts she counseled, the lives she'd helped rebuild. All of it had been penance for her past, payment for the sin of surviving when Miguel hadn't. Now the bill had come due. If this story touches you and you want to see Elena's journey unfold, make sure you're subscribed. Tomorrow's chapter reveals the full scope of Miguel's plan and just how far he's willing to go for revenge. Elena remained motionless on the bed's edge, the revolver's weight familiar in her palm despite the decades. The weapon felt heavier now, not from rust or neglect, but from the accumulated gravity of all the lives she'd tried to save since she'd last held it. 25 years of penance, and it all came down to this cold metal reminder of who she used to be. The air conditioning hummed its mechanical lullaby, but she barely heard it over the rushing in her ears. Through her bedroom window, palm fronds swayed in the humid Miami breeze, casting shadows that danced across the hardwood floor like ghosts from a Colombian jungle. She'd chosen this house specifically for its view of the bay. Water meant escape routes, meant freedom. Now it just felt like a prison with a pretty view. Her fingers traced the revolver's barrel, muscle memory guiding her to the safety mechanism she'd hoped to forget. In her counseling sessions, she often talked about muscle memory with her patients, how the body never forgot the rituals of addiction, how a recovering addict's hands would still know the motions of preparing a hit years into sobriety. She'd never told them she understood because her own hands remembered the weight of laboratory equipment, the precise measurements that could mean the difference between profit and death. The bedside clock read 11:47 p.m. Sophia had been missing for 6 hours. Elena forced herself to stand, her knees protesting after sitting rigid with shock for so long. She moved to the window and pressed her palm against the cool glass. Below, the neighborhood slept peacefully. Porch lights cast warm circles on manicured lawns. Mrs. Chen's cat picked its way delicately across the street, hunting lizards in the moonlight. Normal life, continuing its rhythm while her world cracked apart. She'd built this life brick by careful brick. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the woman who helped broken people find wholeness. The grandmother who attended soccer games and helped with chemistry homework. Oh, the irony of that. The neighbor who brought casseroles to new families and donated blood during Red Cross drives. She'd been so careful, so deliberate in constructing an identity that had nothing to do with jungle labs and cartel money. But identities built on lies were houses of cards, weren't they? The notebook lay open on the kitchen table when she returned. Pages yellow with age, but still legible. Her handwriting from 1987 looked young, optimistic. She'd actually believed they could change things from the inside, that two chemists could somehow balance the scales against Pablo Escobar's empire. Miguel had followed her lead without question, trusting her moral certainty even when it put them both at risk. Entry 47. Modified alkaloid extraction process today. Reduced yield by 23% while maintaining visual consistency. Pablo's distributors won't detect the degradation until street level. Estimate 40,000 fewer doses reaching Miami. She remembered writing those words with something approaching pride. Every corrupted batch had felt like a small victory against the machine they'd been trapped inside. They'd told themselves they were heroes, secret agents working for justice. The truth was simpler and more damning. They'd been cowards too afraid to walk away, trying to have it both ways. They'd wanted the intellectual challenge, the steady pay, the protection of Escobar's organization, but also wanted to sleep at night. So they'd sabotage just enough to feel righteous while staying valuable enough to stay alive. Until Pablo had discovered their betrayal. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from her daughter Carmen, called Sophia's friends. Nobody's seen her since school. Should I call the police? Elena stared at the message, paralyzed. Carmen lived 40 minutes away in Fort Lauderdale with her husband and 2 younger children. She had no idea her mother had once been anything other than a refugee from Colombia's violence. A simplified truth that Elena had carefully cultivated. For decades, Carmen knew nothing about chemical formulas or cartel labs, or the real reason Elena had arrived in Miami in 1987 with nothing but fake papers and enough guilt to fuel a lifetime of good works. Not yet. She might have gone to see that boy from her physics class. Let me check a few more places first. The lie came easily. Too easily. Elena set the phone aside before Carmen could respond with more questions she couldn't answer honestly. 47 hours and 13 minutes until Miguel's deadline. Elena walked through her house, seeing it with new eyes. The framed diplomas on her office wall. Photos of Sofia at various ages. Gap-toothed at 7, proud in her quinceañera dress at 15. Serious and beautiful in last year's school portrait. The kitchen where they'd made Sunday morning pancakes just a week ago. Sofia chattering about college applications and her dreams of studying marine biology. Everything Elena had fought to protect, everything that made her life worth living, condensed into one 17-year-old girl who had no idea her grandmother's past had just reached across decades to destroy her future. The jungle was calling her home, and this time, Elena wouldn't be leaving anyone behind. Elena's phone rang at 3:17 a.m., jolting her from the restless half-sleep she'd fallen into while sitting at the kitchen table. The notebook still lay open before her, and for a disorienting moment she thought she was back in the lab. Miguel calling to report another successful sabotage. The caller ID showed Carmen's number. Mom? I'm sorry to call so late, but I couldn't sleep. Sofia still isn't answering her phone. Carmen's voice carried the tight control of a mother trying not to panic. I drove by her friend Jessica's house. No one's seen her. This isn't like her. Elena closed her eyes, gripping the phone. Through the kitchen window, Miami's skyline glittered in the distance, but all she could see were jungle shadows. I know, mija. I'm sure she's... There's something else. Carmen's voice dropped. I went by your house to check on you, and Mrs. Patel next door said she saw a man watching your place yesterday afternoon. Older guy, she said, foreign looking. He was just standing across the street for about an hour. The words hit Elena like ice water. Miguel hadn't just reached out from the past. He'd been watching, learning, planning. Did she say anything else about him? She said he had scars on his face, bad ones. Elena's hand went unconsciously to her own cheek, remembering the night of their escape attempt. She'd heard Miguel scream, heard the wet sound of steel on flesh, but she'd never seen what Pablo's men had done to him. Now she knew he'd survived, but not unchanged. Mom? Are you there? Yes, I'm... Carmen, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Elena stood up, her decision crystallizing. Take David and the kids to your sister's place in Orlando, tonight. Don't pack much, just go. What? Mom, you're scaring me. What's going on? There are some things about my past in Colombia that I never told you. Dangerous things. I think someone from that time has found me, and they might try to use you and the children to get to me. Silence stretched between them, filled with 25 years of carefully maintained lies beginning to crumble. When Carmen finally spoke, her voice was small, confused. What kind of things? Elena looked down at the notebook, at her young handwriting documenting their rebellion against one of the most violent men who ever lived. How could she explain that the mother Carmen thought she knew, the grandmother who read bedtime stories and volunteered at church fundraisers, had once held the chemical keys to Pablo Escobar's empire, that she'd helped flood American streets with poison before finding the courage to fight back? The kind that follow you forever, no matter how far you run or how good you try to be afterward. Jesus, Mom. Are you saying Sophia? Sophia is my responsibility, but I won't let them hurt the rest of the family. Elena's voice hardened with resolve. Go to Orlando, now. Don't tell anyone where you're going, and don't contact me until I call you. I'm not leaving you alone with this. You are, because I'm your mother, and I'm telling you to protect your children. Elena softened her tone, letting her love show through. Carmen, everything I've done for the last 25 years has been to keep you safe from the person I used to be. Don't make that sacrifice meaningless now. Another long silence. Then, will I see you again? Elena stared at Sophia's most recent photo, her granddaughter laughing at something off camera, eyes bright with the fearlessness that came from never imagining the world could be truly cruel. I hope so, Mia. After Carmen hung up, Elena sat in the pre-dawn quiet, listening to her house settle around her. The grandfather clock in the living room, Sophia's favorite because she loved to watch the pendulum swing, marked each passing second with mechanical precision. Somewhere in Colombia, Miguel was probably awake too, counting down the hours until she came home to face what she'd left behind. She opened her laptop and bought a one-way ticket to Bogotá, departing in 18 hours. The name on the ticket was Elena Rodriguez, an identity she'd maintained for exactly this possibility, though she'd prayed she'd never need it. Her phone buzzed with a new message from the unknown number. This time it was a photo, Sophia asleep on what looked like a cot, covered with a thin blanket. She looked peaceful, unharmed, but the concrete walls behind her told a different story. Below the photo, 3 words. She's dreaming. Elena. Elena deleted her internet history, closed the laptop, and walked to her closet. The go-bag felt heavier than she remembered, weighted with the ghost of who she'd once been. She tucked the revolver into her waistband and took one last look around the bedroom, where she'd slept peacefully for over 2 decades. Tomorrow, Dr. Elena Vasquez would disappear as completely as if she'd never existed. The woman who boarded that plane to Bogotá would be someone else entirely, someone she'd spent 25 years trying to forget. The jungle had been patient, but it was finally calling her home. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through her bedroom window and the immediate crushing weight of remembering. For one merciful moment between sleep and consciousness, she'd been Dr. Vasquez again, worried only about her morning appointments and whether Sophia had finished her calculus homework. Then reality crashed back. The notebook, Miguel's voice, the photo of Sophia sleeping in captivity. Her phone showed 7 missed calls from work. She was supposed to lead group therapy at 9, 12 recovering addicts who depended on her steady presence to anchor their fragile sobriety. Elena sat on the bed's edge, staring at her reflection in the dark television screen. The woman looking back at her seemed unfamiliar, as if 25 years of carefully constructed identity were already dissolving. She called her supervisor. Janet, I need to take emergency leave. Family crisis. Elena, you sound terrible. Is everything okay? Janet's concern felt genuine, making the lie harder to swallow. My mother is dying, in Colombia. I have to fly out today. The words tasted like ash. Elena's real mother had died when she was 12, another truth buried so deep she'd almost forgotten it herself. Of course, take all the time you need. Should I reschedule your patients? Elena thought about Marcus, 2 months clean from heroin, who'd finally started talking about his childhood trauma. About Sarah, whose hands still shook when she spoke, but who'd made it 60 days without a drink. They trusted her. They needed consistency. Reassign them to Dr. Morrison. And Janet, if anyone comes looking for me, anyone at all, you don't know where I've gone. The pause stretched too long. Elena, are you in some kind of trouble? Just promise me. I promise. Elena showered mechanically, her hands moving through familiar routines while her mind churned. She'd spent years helping people rebuild their lives after devastating choices, but she'd never told them the hardest truth. Sometimes the past didn't stay buried, no matter how many good deeds you piled on top of it. The airport departure time loomed, 6 hours. She moved through her house like a ghost, touching objects that might never feel her hands again. The ceramic bowl Sophia had made in art class, slightly lopsided but painted with careful love. The bookshelf lined with addiction recovery texts, their margins filled with Elena's notes from conferences and case studies. A lifetime of becoming someone worthy of redemption. Her phone rang. "Dr. Morrison, Janet told me you're dealing with a crisis. Is there anything specific I should know about your patients?" Elena almost broke then. Morrison was a good man, younger than her but skilled at guiding people through the wreckage of their worst decisions. She wanted to warn him that Marcus might relapse without consistent support, that Sarah needed someone to notice when she stopped talking completely because that meant she was planning to drink again. They're all in their files. You'll do fine. Elena, are you sure you're all right? You sound different. Because the careful walls between Dr. Vasquez and the woman who'd once measured Pablo Escobar's profits in chemical formulas were crumbling. Because she could feel herself changing back into someone she'd hoped was dead and buried. "I have to go." She hung up and immediately regretted the coldness in her voice. Morrison didn't deserve that. None of them did. The television droned in the background, a news report about a drug bust in Medellin. Elena froze as the reporter mentioned increases in cocaine purity on Miami streets, chemical signatures that suggested sophisticated new production methods. The camera panned across laboratory equipment that looked disturbingly familiar. Her phone buzzed with a text. "Watching the news?" "That's our old formula, Elena. The one we perfected before you decided to play hero." "I've been busy." Elena's hands shook as she reached for the remote, but another message stopped her. 26 hours. "Don't disappoint me again." She turned off the television and sat in sudden silence. The house felt wrong now, contaminated by Miguel's presence even through digital distance. Every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes. Every sound made her reach instinctively for the gun at her waist. At noon, she called Carmen from a burner phone bought with cash. "Mom? Thank God. We're in Orlando, but I'm terrified. David keeps asking questions I can't answer." "Good. Stay there until you hear from me. And Carmen? Whatever happens, whatever you learn about me in the news or anywhere else, remember that loving you and Sophia has been the most real thing in my life. You're talking like you're going to die." Elena looked around the living room one last time, at Sophia's textbooks still scattered on the coffee table, at the family photos documenting a life built on necessary lies. Outside, Mrs. Patel was watering her garden, completely unaware that her quiet neighbor was about to vanish forever. "I'm talking like I'm going to live." Finally. Elena ended the call and sat motionless in the silence that followed, the burner phone heavy in her palm. Through the window, she watched Mrs. Patel tend to her orchids with the same gentle precision she'd shown every morning for 15 years. The elderly woman had been Elena's first real friend in this neighborhood, bringing homemade samosas when Elena moved in and never asking too many questions about her past. Now Elena wondered if she'd ever see that kind face again. The weight of accumulated deceptions pressed down on her like jungle humidity. 25 years of carefully constructed normalcy, and it had taken Miguel less than 24 hours to strip it all away. She thought of her patients. Marcus with his needle-scarred arms and desperate need for someone to believe in him. Sarah, whose daughter had stopped visiting because the trust had been broken too many times. Elena had guided them through the wreckage of their worst choices, but she'd never told them that some sins followed you across decades, waiting in the shadows like patient predators. Her hands moved automatically, methodically destroying evidence of Dr. Elena Vasquez's existence. Shredding documents, wiping hard drives, clearing browser histories, each deletion felt like erasing another piece of her soul. But the woman boarding that plane to Bogotá couldn't leave traces behind. The clinic would eventually stop looking for their missing counselor. Mrs. Patel would water her flowers and wonder why the nice lady next door had vanished without saying goodbye. Sophia's friends would graduate without her, never knowing what had pulled their classmate into the darkness. In her bedroom, Elena opened the safe hidden behind her medical diplomas. Inside, passports in 3 different names, $50,000 in cash, and a photograph she'd thought she'd destroyed years ago. Miguel at 26, standing beside their makeshift laboratory in the jungle, grinning with the confidence of someone who believed they could change the world through small acts of rebellion. His face was unmarked then, handsome in the way that made village girls follow him with their eyes, before Pablo's men had carved their displeasure into his flesh. She'd loved him once. That was the truth she'd buried deepest, beneath even the guilt and fear. Not just as a lab partner or fellow conspirator, but with the desperate intensity of two people clinging to each other while their world burned around them. They'd made love in that stifling jungle heat, whispering plans for escape between stolen kisses, believing their sabotage made them heroes rather than the cowards they actually were. The night everything fell apart, she'd run first. When Pablo's security forces surrounded their lab, when the screaming started, when Miguel shouted for her to save herself, she'd run. By the time she reached the extraction point, she'd convinced herself he was dead. It had been easier that way, building her new life on the foundation of his assumed martyrdom, rather than facing the possibility that she'd abandoned him to torture and disfigurement. Elena's phone buzzed. Another photo of Sofia, this one showing her granddaughter awake, eating what looked like rice and beans from a metal plate. Sofia's eyes held confusion but not terror. She probably still believed this was a case of mistaken identity, that someone would realize their error and release her. The innocence in that expression broke Elena's heart more completely than any threat Miguel could have written. Below the photo, she asked about you this morning, wanted to know if her grandmother was coming to get her. What should I tell her about the woman who raised her? The cruelty was surgical in its precision. Miguel knew exactly how to twist the knife, not just threatening Sofia's life, but forcing Elena to confront how her carefully constructed goodness would crumble under scrutiny. What would Sofia think when she learned that her beloved grandmother, the woman who'd helped her with chemistry homework and taught her about redemption through service, had once been integral to Pablo Escobar's cocaine empire? Elena typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on silence. Words were weapons now, and anything she said could be used against Sofia later. She packed the photograph of young Miguel in her go-bag, along with clothes that would help her blend into rural Colombia. The designer suits and silk blouses that marked Dr. Vasquez as successful and respectable stayed in the closet like shed skin. The woman returning to face her past would need to be someone harder, someone who remembered how to survive in a world where mercy was weakness and trust was suicide. At 3 p.m., she loaded her bags into the Honda and backed out of the driveway for the last time. Mrs. Patel waved from her garden, and Elena waved back, knowing it was goodbye to everything she'd tried to become. The house in her rearview mirror looked smaller than it had that morning, already fading like a half-remembered dream. 22 hours until Miguel's deadline. The jungle was waiting, patient as death, ready to reclaim what had always belonged to it. The Miami International Airport departure terminal buzzed with the controlled chaos of afternoon travelers, but Elena moved through it like a sleepwalker, her body operating on autopilot while her mind remained trapped in that Colombian laboratory 25 years ago. She'd arrived 3 hours early, not from anxiety about missing the flight, but because sitting still in her empty house had become unbearable. Every familiar object had felt like an accusation, every photograph a reminder of the life she was about to abandon. At the gate, she settled into a corner seat and opened Miguel's notebook one final time, studying the pages that had started this nightmare. Her younger handwriting stared back at her, documenting their careful rebellion with scientific precision, but as she read more closely, details she'd forgotten began to surface like bodies rising from deep water. The dates were wrong. Elena's breath caught as she cross-referenced entries, her trained eye-catching discrepancies that 25 years of guilt had obscured. According to her notes, they'd begun sabotaging production on September 15, 1987, but she remembered with sudden crystalline clarity that Miguel had been away that week, called to Pablo's main compound for some urgent consultation. She'd started the sabotage alone, making the decision without consulting him, driven by reports of a 12-year-old girl in Medellin who died from their product. Miguel hadn't known about the sabotage until September 22nd, a full week later. Her hands trembled as she flipped through more pages, finding entry after entry in her handwriting alone. Miguel's contributions didn't begin until nearly 2 weeks into her rebellion, and when they did start, they were cautious, reluctant, not the passionate partnership of two idealistic lovers she'd remembered, but the worried calculations of someone trying to minimize damage already done. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Miguel hadn't been the architect of their resistance. He'd been protecting her from her own dangerous idealism. Elena's phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown Colombian number. She answered without thinking, her mind still reeling from this new understanding of the past. Elena. Miguel's voice carried that same controlled warmth she remembered, but now she could hear the exhaustion beneath it. I see you're at the airport. Right on schedule. You're watching me. I've been watching you for 3 years, sitting in the back row of your conferences, reading your published papers on addiction recovery. Did you know you mentioned me once? In that article about survivor's guilt in the Journal of Therapeutic Medicine. You called me a colleague who paid the ultimate price for moral courage. His laugh was bitter, hollow, the ultimate price, as if I'd died a hero instead of living as a monster. Elena looked around the departure gate, suddenly paranoid. A businessman reading El Tiempo, a mother chasing a toddler, an elderly woman knitting. Any of them could be his eyes. What do you want from me, Miguel? What I've always wanted, for you to stop lying. The warmth vanished from his voice entirely. To yourself, to your family, to those addicts you counsel like some kind of saint. You want to know what really happened that night, Elena? I know what happened. We were betrayed by you. The words cut through the airport noise like a blade. You started the sabotage without telling me. When I found out, I begged you to stop. Said we could find another way, something that wouldn't get us all killed. But you were so righteous, so convinced of your own moral superiority. Elena's mouth went dry. Deep in her memory, fragments of arguments began surfacing. Miguel's worried face in the lamplight, his hands gripping her shoulders as he pleaded with her to be more careful, to think about consequences. When Pablo's men came for us that night, Miguel continued, they already knew exactly who was responsible. They didn't torture me for information, Elena. They tortured me as punishment, for being stupid enough to love someone who valued her conscience more than our lives. The boarding announcement echoed through the terminal, but Elena couldn't move. Passengers shuffled past her toward the jetway while she sat frozen, the notebook heavy in her lap. Sofia is safe, Miguel said quietly. She's at a farm outside Medellin, being cared for by people who lost children to the drugs we helped perfect. They understand justice better than courts or governments ever could. Let her go. This is between us. No. His voice hardened again. This is about the woman who abandoned me to hell so she could play savior in Miami. The woman who built a reputation on helping addicts recover from the poison she helped create. You want your granddaughter back? Come face what you really are. Elena stood on shaking legs, joining the boarding queue as if sleepwalking. I'm coming. I know you are. Because despite everything, you still think you're the hero of this story. The line went dead, leaving Elena alone with the terrible weight of understanding. She hadn't been Miguel's partner in rebellion. She'd been his destroyer, and everything that followed had been built on that foundational lie. Elena handed her boarding pass to the gate agent with trembling fingers, the woman's routine smile blurring as tears she couldn't afford to shed burned behind her eyes. The jetway stretched ahead like a tunnel into the past, and with each step, she felt Dr. Elena Vasquez dissolving, leaving behind only the reckless chemist who'd condemned the man she loved to a lifetime of agony. The first-class cabin offered no comfort. Elena buckled herself in and immediately pulled out her phone, fingers hovering over Carmen's contact. Her daughter deserved the truth, not all of it, but enough to understand why her mother might not return. Elena typed and deleted message after message, each attempt falling short of explaining how 25 years of goodness could be built on such rotten foundations. Finally, whatever happens, know that you and Sofia saved me from becoming something worse. I love you. She sent it before she could reconsider, then powered off the phone. As the plane taxied, Elena opened the notebook again, this time reading her younger self's words with the crushing clarity Miguel had forced upon her. Every entry revealed her arrogance more starkly. September 16th, reduced alkaloid concentration by 12% today. Miguel will understand when I explain. September 20th, Miguel discovered the alterations. He's frightened. But fear makes cowards of good men. We have a moral obligation. God, she'd been insufferable. a naive 28-year-old drunk on her own righteousness, so certain that her chemistry degree and guilty conscience gave her the right to make life-or-death decisions for everyone around her. She dismissed Miguel's fears as weakness when they'd been wisdom, ignored his desperate attempts to find safer forms of resistance. The plane lifted off, and Elena watched Miami shrink below, the city where she'd reinvented herself, where she'd spent decades helping addicts rebuild their shattered lives. Had any of it been real? Or had she simply been performing an elaborate penance, playing the role of redeemer while running from the truth of what she'd cost Miguel? She thought of Marcus, how his eyes lit up during their sessions when he talked about his daughter, the 8-year-old he was fighting to see again. Elena had guided him through the hardest conversations of his life, helped him understand that recovery meant facing the people you'd hurt. Now she wondered if she'd been a fraud all along, a counselor who'd never truly confronted her own deepest damage. The flight attendant offered champagne. Elena accepted, though the bubbles tasted like guilt. Around her, passengers settled into the rhythm of international travel, executives reviewing presentations, families heading home, tourists clutching guidebooks. None of them knew they were sitting next to a woman returning to face a man she'd destroyed. Miguel's voice echoed in her memory. Despite everything, you still think you're the hero of this story. The accusation stung because it carried a grain of truth. Even now, part of her was constructing a narrative where her intentions mattered more than her impact, where loving Sofia enough to risk everything somehow absolved her of abandoning Miguel to Pablo's revenge. But intentions were luxuries that victims couldn't afford to care about. Elena pulled out her laptop and began typing. Not a journal entry or confession, but instructions. Carmen would need to know about the safe deposit box in Orlando, the bank accounts established under different names, the investments that could fund Sofia's college education if Elena never returned. Practical matters, the kind of loose ends a responsible person tied up before walking into the past. She paused at a section about the house, remembering Mrs. Patel's kind face and wondering who would tell her what had happened to her quiet neighbor. The elderly woman had shared stories about her grandchildren in Mumbai, never asking why Elena's family photos were limited to Carmen and Sofia, never prying about the careful boundaries Elena maintained around her past. The plane reached cruising altitude, 6 hours to Bogota, then a connecting flight to Medellin. 12 hours total before she'd be breathing Colombian air again, feeling jungle humidity against her skin for the first time in 25 years. The thought made her nauseous. Her laptop screen reflected her face, older now, marked by decades of careful living, but still recognizably the woman who'd thought she could outwit Pablo Escobar through chemistry and moral conviction. Miguel was right. She'd been playing hero while he'd been living with the consequences of her heroism. Elena closed the laptop and stared out at clouds that looked like cotton batting, soft and deceptive from this distance. Below them was an ocean that had separated her from the truth for a quarter century. But geography meant nothing when the past decided to come calling. The real question wasn't whether she could save Sofia. It was whether facing Miguel's ruined face would finally force her to see herself clearly, and whether that vision would destroy whatever was left of the woman she'd tried so hard to become. The Medellin airport felt like stepping into a fever dream. 25 years had transformed the terminal, gleaming marble where Elena remembered cracked concrete, modern shops replacing military checkpoints. But the humidity still carried the same weight, pressing against her skin like an accusation. She moved through customs with the careful neutrality of someone trying to become invisible, though her American passport and designer luggage marked her as clearly as a neon sign. A taxi driver approached with practiced English, but Elena answered in Spanish, her accent shifting unconsciously back to the regional cadences she'd spent decades erasing. The man's eyebrows lifted slightly at the transformation, but he simply nodded and led her to his car. "Where to, señora?" Elena handed him an address Miguel had texted during her layover in Bogota. Not Sofia's location, she wasn't naive enough to expect that yet, but a meeting place in the hills above the city. As they drove, Elena watched Medellin unfold around her, transformed beyond recognition. The war zone of her memories had become something approaching normal, though she could still see scars if she knew where to look. Neighborhoods where entire blocks had been leveled, now rebuilt with the careful uniformity of places trying to forget their own history. Like her, the city had reinvented itself. Unlike her, It had done so honestly. The taxi climbed into the mountains as afternoon shadows lengthened. Eventually, they reached a small cafe perched on a hillside, its terrace offering a panoramic view of the valley below. Elena paid the driver and walked inside on unsteady legs, scanning faces until she found him. Miguel sat alone at a corner table, his back to the wall, a habit that made perfect sense now. A baseball cap cast shadows across his features, but she could see enough to understand why he'd hidden from her for so long. The left side of his face was a topographical map of old violence, scar tissue forming ridges and valleys where Pablo's men had carved their message. His left eye was gone entirely, the socket covered by a leather patch that gave him the appearance of an aging pirate. But his remaining eye was the same warm brown she remembered, and when he looked up at her approach, she saw an echo of the young man who'd once believed they could change the world through small acts of rebellion. Elena. He stood, the movement revealing a pronounced limp. You look exactly like your publicity photos. She sat across from him, fighting the urge to reach across the table, to touch his damaged face and apologize for 25 years of silence. Where is Sophia? Faith. For now. Miguel signaled the waitress for coffee. She's asking about you constantly, wants to know when her grandmother is coming to get her. I told her it depends on whether her grandmother is ready to tell the truth. Elena's hands clenched in her lap. I remember now. What really happened? Do you? Miguel leaned back, studying her with his single eye. Tell me. I started the sabotage without consulting you. You tried to stop me, but I wouldn't listen. The words tasted like ash. When Pablo's men came, they already knew exactly who was responsible. Miguel's scarred mouth attempted something that might have been a smile. Closer, but not quite there yet. Elena's stomach dropped. What are you talking about? The night they came for us, Elena. That last night in the lab. Do you remember what you were doing when we heard the helicopters? She closed her eyes, forcing herself back to that humid evening in September 1987. The memory surfaced reluctantly. She'd been at the radio, frantically trying to raise their DEA contact, desperate to arrange immediate extraction. For both of them. You were calling for help, Miguel said quietly. For yourself. For us. I was trying to save us both. No. Miguel's voice carried no anger now, only exhaustion. You were trying to save yourself. You'd finally realized that your moral crusade was going to get everyone killed, and you wanted out. When I asked what you were doing, you said the Americans could only extract one person on short notice. The coffee arrived, but Elena couldn't touch it. The memory was crystallizing with horrible clarity, the radio operator's voice crackling through static, explaining that the helicopter could only safely carry one passenger given the deteriorating security situation. You chose yourself, Miguel continued. And when I said I understood, that you should go, you didn't argue. You kissed me goodbye and promised to send help, but we both knew help wouldn't come in time. Elena's vision blurred. I thought you were dead. Did you? Or did you decide I was dead because it was easier than admitting you'd left me behind? Miguel reached across the table, his scarred fingers covering her hand. The woman who spent 25 years counseling addicts about taking responsibility for their choices. What choice did you make that night, Elena? The question hung between them like a blade. Around them, other patrons chatted and laughed, oblivious to the reckoning unfolding at the corner table. In the valley below, Medellin glittered in the fading light, beautiful and treacherous as a handful of diamonds. Elena looked into Miguel's remaining eye and finally spoke the truth she'd been running from for a quarter century. I chose to save myself and let you die. The words hung in the air between them, final as a death sentence. Elena felt something fundamental shift inside her chest, as if a tumor made of lies had finally been cut away, leaving behind raw but clean tissue. Miguel's hand remained over hers, his scarred fingers surprisingly gentle. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? Destroying your life? Abandoning you to... Elena gestured helplessly at his ravaged face. For finally saying it out loud. Miguel lifted his coffee with his free hand, the cup trembling slightly. Do you know what the worst part was? Not the torture, not losing my eye, not even the years of hiding. It was knowing that somewhere you were telling yourself a different story. making yourself the tragic hero instead of what you really were. Elena pulled her hand away, wrapping her arms around herself as if she could hold the pieces together. Below them, the city sparkled in the gathering dusk, indifferent to their small human drama playing out among the coffee cups and tourist chatter. "Sophia," she whispered, "is at a farm 20 minutes from here, helping an old woman named Lucia feed chickens." Miguel's voice softened. "Lucia lost 2 sons to the drugs we helped perfect, but she's treating Sophia like a granddaughter because children shouldn't pay for the sins of their elders." The irony wasn't lost on Elena. "Unlike you, unlike me." He studied her face with that single eye, as if memorizing features he'd carried in his memory for decades. "I told myself I wanted revenge. Spent years planning how to make you face what you'd done. But sitting here now, looking at you," he paused, seeming to reach for words that didn't exist. "I think I just wanted you to remember me, the real me, not the saint you created to make your guilt more bearable." Elena thought of her office in Miami, the addiction counseling sessions where she'd helped dozens of people face their own destructive choices. All those conversations about accountability and making amends, while she carried the greatest unacknowledged debt of her life. "I became a counselor because of you," she said suddenly, "because I knew what it felt like to be destroyed by someone else's addiction. Addiction to feeling righteous, to being the hero. I thought if I could help people face their damage honestly, maybe I could—" She trailed off, recognizing the self-serving nature of even this confession. "Maybe you could earn forgiveness without actually asking for it." Miguel's tone wasn't cruel, just tired. "Elena, do you know how many times I imagined this conversation? What I'd say, how you'd react. I rehearsed every possible version except this one, which is the one where I realize I don't want your apology." He leaned back, his hand finding the rim of his coffee cup. "Apologies are for accidents, for mistakes made in good faith. What you did was a choice, a calculated decision to value your life over mine. And you know what? Maybe that was the right choice." Elena stared at him. "What are you talking about? You were 28, brilliant, with decades of potential ahead of you. I was a romantic fool who thought love could justify working for a monster." Miguel's scarred mouth twisted. "You survived and became something better. I survived and became something worse. Pablo's dead, but I spent 15 years working for the cartels that replaced him, using the chemistry you taught me, helping them perfect new ways to destroy lives. Who deserves forgiveness in that equation?" The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. "Miguel, I brought Sophia here because I needed you to see yourself clearly, but maybe I needed to see myself clearly too." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a cell phone, sliding it across the table. "Call your granddaughter. Tell her you're coming to get her." Elena's hands shook as she took the phone. "Just like that?" "Just like that." Miguel stood slowly, favoring his damaged leg. 25 years is enough time for both of us to spend in hell. Wait." Elena rose too, suddenly desperate not to let him disappear again. "What will you do now?" Miguel looked out over the valley where lights were beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness. "Lucia needs help with her farm. She's getting old, and her arthritis makes the heavy work difficult. I thought maybe," he shrugged, "maybe I could try earning forgiveness instead of demanding it." Elena watched him limp toward the cafe's exit, this broken man who'd spent decades carrying her betrayal like shrapnel in his heart. At the door, he paused without turning around. "Elena? Yes? Stop trying to be a saint. The world has enough saints. What it needs is people brave enough to be honestly human." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with a borrowed phone and the strange, terrifying peace that comes from finally seeing yourself clearly. Elena dialed the number he'd programmed, listening to it ring as stars appeared above Medellin's transformed skyline. When Sophia's voice came through the speaker, bright, unafraid, asking when they could go home, Elena closed her eyes and began the long work of becoming real.